A reading from the second book of Chronicles. In those days, all the princes of Judah, the priests, and the people added infidelity to infidelity, practicing all the abominations of the nations and polluting the Lord's temple, which he had consecrated in Jerusalem. Early and often did the Lord, the God of their fathers, send his messengers to them. For he had compassion on his people and his dwelling place. But they mocked the messengers of God, despised his warnings, and scoffed at his prophets, until the anger of the Lord against his people was so inflamed that there was no remedy. Their enemies burnt the house of God, tore down the walls of Jerusalem, set all its palaces afire, and destroyed all its precious objects. Those who escaped the sword were carried captive to Babylon, where they became servants of the king of the Chaldeans and his sons, until the kingdom of the Persians came to power. All of this was to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken to Jeremiah. Until the land has retrieved its lost Sabbaths, during all the time it lies waste, it shall have rest, while 70 years are fulfilled. In the first year of King Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, the Lord inspired King Cyrus of Persia to issue this proclamation throughout his kingdom, both by word of mouth and in writing. Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, all the kingdoms of the earth the Lord, the God of heaven, has given to me. And he has also charged me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever therefore among you belongs to any part of this people, let him go up, and may his God be with him. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
All this was to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah. Until the land has retrieved its lost Sabbaths, during all the time it lies waste, it shall have rest, while 70 years are fulfilled. Brothers, give it a rest. The trouble with our life is that it takes a lot of care. Every state of life requires a lot of care, but it's very easy to lose sense of the balance. We have these 4 pillars that we constantly talk about. We talk about the pillars to all of our vocations candidates. We brag about how balanced our life is because all these pillars are supposed to play off of one another. We're supposed to keep them in a healthy tension so that they support one another. It doesn't mean the whole can't get out of balance sometimes. Sometimes you have to spend more time on this or that or the other thing. But the ideal is to keep the balance. When our lives become imbalanced, we're giving way to idolatry. Each of us has an idolatry that we're most prone to. Mine happens to be study. I like to study. I like to do well in my studies. It pleases me when I get good grades. It pleases me when my teachers say, "What a great paper. Maybe you should think about publishing that." The ego boost from that sort of stuff is very hard to resist. Some brothers are people persons. Some brothers want to spend all of their time in prayer, like monastics. Some brothers give in to the temptation of workaholism, making an idol of the ministry they do. And each one of them brings its own rewards, we think. And we justify it all normally on pragmatic bases. The people need me. If I don't study enough, I'm going to look like a failure. And then what's going to become of my future? How will I ever become the world-renowned theologian? If I don't devote enough time to prayer, won't I lose touch with God? If I don't spend enough time with my brothers, what will they think of me? So each one of us has our own idolatry. What the Lord points out to us today in this reading from the Chronicles is that you have to leave some of your land fallow sometimes. Now that's a two-way street, and this reading doesn't really get into this, but if you think about it, some lands, some plots in your Dominican life, you don't give enough time to. You're letting it have rest, I suppose, but remember, after a while, without cultivation, you get a lot of weeds and a lot of hardpack. And it's going to be harder and harder for you to break up that ground again. On the other hand, if you're cultivating a plot too much, you're exhausting the soil. And the tricky part is this. If you don't give that land rest, God's going to make it rest for you somehow, eventually. You may not see it right away, but eventually you're going to see it. Because the fruitfulness of every quarter of your total land as a Dominican is limited by the fruitfulness of every other quarter in some way. It doesn't mean they're all even. I'd say probably most of our time is given to study as students, right? So, it's a larger chunk. But everything else needs to be cultivated too, so that the mutual fruitfulness of all of them can, through, cross-pollination, let's say, right? You get healthier and healthier fruit. But if you don't do that, well, you can plow the fields all you want, fertilize them all you want. Put in the best seed. Put in the most predictable crops. What you're going to get is mediocrity, one way or another. So let it rest. Give it a rest. Victor spoke today during his homily. Laetare Sunday, this midway point of Lent, is a chance for all of us to sit back and ask, fasting, prayer, and almsgiving. I get that, right? We know that's the essence of what we're trying to do during Lent. But how do fasting, prayer, and almsgiving play into your lives as Dominicans in terms of making sure that you're cultivating every quarter of your land in a fruitful way? I myself am looking at that again. So, let's all readjust. Let's give it a rest in some places. And let's get back to cultivating those plots that we've been neglecting a bit too much this season.